Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Michelle Aubin and Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from thoughtchange.com, and I'm here today with Joanna Bristow-Watkins. Joanna uses Egyptian alchemy in her transformational work with people. Egyptian alchemy is something I really love, so I'm really excited to share this conversation with Joanna. Say hello, Joanna.
Hello, Linda. Hello, everybody.
Fantastic to have you here. How did you get on this path of Egyptian? Like, you're in the UK, correct?
Yep.
And you studied Egyptian mythology?
Well, everyone in England studies a little bit of Egyptian mythology at primary school, would you believe? We're all mad about it here. And when I was young, about 12, I think the Tutankhamun artifacts toured, and lots of us at that age queued up to see it. So, we are quite fascinated by Egypt here. But the Egyptian alchemy came about because I'd studied Reiki, and then I studied Egyptian Reiki. And it was a system called Sakim. And it was fantastic, but the notes that came with the system didn't really talk about Egypt at all. So as an ex-travel agent, I decided to go over to Egypt and find out a bit more. That's how it started. And from that, I ended up developing my own Egyptian alchemy healing system. Wasn't the intention.
I'm curious actually about your system. I worked in the past with some Egyptian alchemy, usually with the Nuturu, the Egyptian gods as archetypes. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your system.
Well, mine came about slightly different way because having decided to go to Egypt, after quite a few trips, 5 or 6 trips, I stumbled into a guy called Hakim Awayan, and he was an Egyptian indigenous wisdom keeper, an oral wisdom keeper. And so I started talking to him about the alternative Egyptology, if you like. I mean, he was an Egyptologist, actually, but being an oral tradition wisdom keeper, a lot of what he taught was contrary to what we learn through history, if you like. So I got very fascinated with that, him explaining that according to his beliefs, the pyramids were at least 13,000 years old. And the Sphinx was about 52,000 years old, which is obviously at odds with the historic view.
You just gave me goosebumps saying that.
So of course he fascinated me, and I started wanting to know more.
By any chance, did he say what the head of the Sphinx was before it was a Sphinx?
He said it was a lady.
Really?
He said it was a pharaonic lady, yes, and that the beard was added later. A lot of the damage to the Sphinx was caused by, unfortunately, the Napoleonic soldiers using it for target practice. That was his view anyway. He's died now, sadly. He died in about 2009. But I met him a number of times and he told me some amazing things. I mean, one of the things I want to say really early on, because I know it will really interest you, because you mentioned the Neteru, which is the name for the gods, the plural gods. The singular is Neter. And we usually spell it Neter, but it can be just spelled Ntr because they didn't have any vowels in the hieroglyphs. So it can be spelt just with the consonants, or we can add whatever vowels we think would give us the right phonetics. But very quickly realised that that word has led to our word nature. That is the hub, or the nub, if you like, of the Egyptian alchemy system, is connecting to nature. And I believe that the deities are archetypes relating to different aspects of nature.
I think probably most of the ancient wisdom schools had a similar view of the deities being very associated with nature and...
Absolutely, yes, and the lunar cycle and the stars. So, the astronomy is very important, and astrology, of course, both.
Indeed, indeed. And so today we're actually recording this on a very auspicious day.
Yes. Well, again, it's not an exact science, so different people translate these dates to slightly different dates in our Gregorian calendar. But on a lot of systems, the 4th of September, when we're recording this, is the day of transformation through Anpu. And Anpu is the Kemetian name for Anubis. Some other translations, by the way, have it as the 22nd of September. But just to explain why I use the word Kemetian, Hakim, my oral tradition wisdom keeper, explained to me that the original name for Egypt was Kem, or Kempt as it's sometimes pronounced, translating to the Black Lands. And usually it's meant to refer to the alluvial plain either side of the Nile, which was very black and fertile. Incidentally, the Nile is one of the only rivers in the world that flows south to north, meaning that it flooded at a different time of year, which is another thing that moved towards the very good fertility of the area, and why Kem, or what later became Egypt, was a popular land to occupy because it was a very good growing area.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, so Kem refers to the ancient authentic word for the land that they used themselves rather than Egypt, which is supposedly derived from the Greek. So a lot of the Egyptian deity names that we're familiar with are from the Greek versions of those Egyptian names, and Anubis is an example of that. The IS and the US endings with Anubis, Isis, Osiris are examples, because IS and US were very much Greek endings. So whilst nothing wrong with calling them that, they're still amazing deities to work with.
Yes.
But if you go back to those Cometian names, you get even more energy.
Very, very interesting. So you actually do work with the deities as well in your alchemy?
I do, yeah. Particularly the Amarna period, is that one you're familiar with? Which is the 18th dynasty.
No.
So we're talking about 1350 roughly BC or BCE. And so we're talking about the time of Akhenaten, who sometimes is referred to as the renegade pharaoh, because he, if you like, when he came in, he introduced the Aten as the new sun god and sort of the exclusive sun god. That's how he's presented now anyway. Whereas before that, there was much more a sort of pantheon of deities, where the head deity was Amun. So they were both sun gods. And there's lots of different views on this. I can't claim to be correct because there's no way of referring back to anyone else to corroborate it. But my belief or my understanding is that Akhenaten, because he was a monotheist, was almost certainly a pacifist. And he definitely was quite concerned about the corruption of the Amun priesthood when he became pharaoh. And so by changing the lead deity to the Aten and claiming that that was really the only deity that mattered, he in one stroke completely unempowered the Amun priesthood.
Well, the pharaoh was the closest thing to the gods. So
Absolutely. Cut them out completely.
yes, exactly. So today, being September 4th and an auspicious day, how could we use today for transformation, just for the listeners? And of course, they're not going to be hearing this on September the 4th. It doesn't matter. You are capable of transforming any day, really.
Absolutely, yes. It's just an even more powerful day because it's his day. I mean, Anubis, or Anpu, as we like to call him, he's known as the embalmer of the dead. And he was, actually, it's not an exact science. So some say he was the son of Osiris, who I call Wuza, or Usar. And that's the Cometian name for him. But some say he's the son of Set. But his mother was always Nephthys, being the Egyptian name that we're used to, the Greek version, but the Cometian version of her name is Nebtet. So he was potentially the son of Wuza, or Usar, otherwise known as Osiris, or his brother Set. He's usually depicted with a jackal head that's black, so a black jackal.
No, I think he's perfect. Yes.
Excellent. So this here that he's holding is a staff of life, and this here that he's holding is an Ankh. And the staff of life, according to some of the stories, actually could literally bring back the dead. And the Ankh, the other meaning of the Ankh is everlasting life. And apparently it's also Cometian for water as well, interestingly. Water being one of the most important elements for life.
Especially in the desert.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. Very, very important. So a quote is that he who walks between worlds, that's another name for Anpu. He's the guardian of the entrance to the netherworld. That was where you went when you died. And he guides the souls of the deceased through the shadowlands to the weighing of the heart. Have you seen that before, where they weigh the heart?
Against the feather.
Exactly, yeah, of course.
I had a teaching actually of that from, I call him Thoth. Some people call
Oh,
him
yes, yes,
Toth or
yes.
Thoth, or I mean, there's so many ways to say his name.
Absolutely.
I actually asked him once in a journey how to say his name, and he just laughed and said his name was more for me than for him, and I could call him whatever I wanted. So it was just really, really interesting. But as you were talking and showing the picture of Anubis, I thought it was really interesting because it brought me back to Christmas when I was 13 years old. My Christmas present was a gold Ankh necklace, which is like
Wow.
really bizarre, really bizarre. And I have journeyed with Anubis as well. For me, he is dark and he's got very red eyes when
Oh.
he's a good ally to have.
Well, part of his domain, if you like, what he oversees is decay, dissolution, and transformation. Well, obviously, the decay and the dissolution are very connected with his role as the assistant to Wuza, of the embalming of the deceased when they go to a Amenti. But the side that we're harnessing on a day like today, which is the transformation ceremony, is his transformational side. And through that, we can ask him to help us transform any negative behaviour patterns that we don't feel are serving us anymore. So that's how we can ask him to help us today. And would you like to know some ways of obviously choosing a day like this, well, or the 22nd, depending on who's done the right translation there of the date to our Gregorian calendar. But if we can't do it on that day, there are other ways we can change the atmosphere, if you like, the frequency of our surroundings to make us closer to Anpu or Anubis. And the colour black and orange connect us closer to him. The crystal carnelian will connect us closer. The fragrance cinnamon will help. And also he's celestially associated with the moon. So if we were to pick a new moon or a full moon, we could call on that connection as well. His energy center is the sacral chakra, and he's connected, well, I mean, he's connected with anything that you want to transmute, but if you wanted to just perhaps list the top 5 parts of the body or whatever that he's associated with, it would be digestion, instinct, sexuality, loyalty, and really overcoming and accepting your shadow self. So it'd be particularly pertinent to work with him on any of those aspects.
And how would a person, like I know how I would work with Anubis, but for our listeners who maybe aren't used to working with Egyptian deity, what would you recommend for them?
Well, I would try and set up, and this is working with any deity, whether it's an Egyptian deity or an angel or whatever is their spiritual guide, I would try and set up a little bit of an altar. You don't have to spend a long time on it. If you've got a photograph of them, then that's a nice touch. But certainly if you do have aspects, you know, that we talked about, the carnelian, if you really can't get hold of any in time, bizarrely, I find what I call etheric crystals very effective. So you can just imagine some carnelian on your altar, or you could just print out a quick picture of a piece of carnelian. That would work as well. And cinnamon essential oil would be lovely, but if you can't get hold of that, it's very easy these days to buy a cinnamon stick. And you could even, on your little altar area, which need be nothing special, it can even be part of a table where you're working if you've got a dedicated table, but you could bring in the orange and the black there with maybe an orange or a black tablecloth, and whatever, you know, if you go for the orange, maybe put some other black pieces on there to try and get the connection together. If you happen to have ever been to Egypt and you've come back with one of the deities, put all those things together. And the other really useful thing to know, you're talking about the pronunciation of Thoth, and those pronunciations are great, but you may not know that that actually is another example of one of the Greek versions of the name. And he was definitely called Thoth and Toth when he was in Atlantis. But the deity that we want to connect with as part of our Egyptian or Kemetian beliefs is Tehuti, which again can be spelt lots of different ways. Very different energy, yes, and we can spell it with DJ or we can spell it with 2 T's. But Tehuti is the guardian of time and space, as well as the architect of the universe. So whenever I'm working with any of the Egyptian deities, I always call in Tehuti and ask him to bend time and space to the best possible time for my little meditation or my little process. So it's a good tip to use for anything.
Perfect. That is actually, that's a beautiful example of how people can call on these archetypes to have better results, to have more transformation, whatever their goal is for the moment.
So I would call him in, and I would call him in. You know, we always talk about the law of three, which is actually very important for Tehuti, as you may know, because the Emerald Tablets of Thoth that some people might have heard about, you know, is more connected perhaps to his Atlantean life. But one of the theories is that the Emerald Tablets of Thoth were secreted under the pores of the Sphinx. So that brings us back to Egypt again. But the whole Tehuti, as above, so below, Thoth laws are all about the importance of three. So I would always call on all the deities 3 times. So I would start by saying, Tehuti, 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 we call upon you to be with us now, to connect me to you and to allow me to ask you to bend time and space to put me into the best possible time frame for the work I'm about to start. Then I would call in, and I would use the Kemetian name for Anubis, which is Anpu. So I would call in Anpu, Anpu, Anpu. I call upon you to be with me now, to bring your transformational skills to help me to transmute any negative behaviour patterns which are no longer serving me. And I would ask that I work only for the highest good, and to ensure that I might add 3 times in love and light, in love and light, in love and light, which just verbalizes, if you like, our positive intent of working with Anpu.
Beautiful. I can almost feel energy shift just as you're talking. It's lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very good. It's very good. And Joanna's got a wonderful little meditation that she's going to offer the viewers. If you're interested, I will put the link underneath the description so that you can download that and have an experience.
So, I mean, it's about a 20-minute meditation. It's usually available for sale on my website, but we've talked about it in advance, and as it seems very pertinent to today's podcast, I'm happy to send it to anyone who connects to my mailing list and tells me that they've found out about it through Linda's podcast or mention her name. Either will work, and as long as I've got a secure email address to send it to, I can send a link through.
Is that something people would take actual issues into to help transform?
I would, yes. I mean, the thing is, most of us, sadly, have got more than one negative behaviour pattern that we want to work on. So it can be used more than once. Some people are able to do more than one in the first go. It really depends on their skills of focus, really, I guess. And
it could be done anytime. It doesn't have to be on an auspicious day.
Well, absolutely, because with Tehuti, we can ask him to bend the time back to an auspicious day, can't we?
Of course, it's perfect. It's perfect. So in your travels with the Nuturu, you must have had some profound experiences with them.
Yes, I have. I mean, it's interesting because I used to take groups quite regularly to Egypt, and I took a group one year, and it was in May 2005. And it was, I didn't even think about the numerology, but we were going to Akhenaten. That was the name of Akhenaten city. So this is going back to the 18th dynasty that we mentioned earlier. And he has a city in the middle of Egypt, but it was neglected. After his period of time, they kind of wiped him out of their history in the short term, although he's been rediscovered lately. And his wife, Nefertiti, is probably one of the best known female queens. But anyway, his city, Akhenaten, as it was known, is close to a modern day city called Tel El-Amarna. We were on a trip that was mostly in Giza, but we were going down to Tel El-Amarna midway through the trip. As we were travelling down there, I realised that it was the 5th of May 2005. So we actually had a 555 in numerology, which is the numerology, amongst other things, for expansion. But it also represents the 5 elements, which is in the Kemetian philosophy, it's earth, fire, water, air, and spirit, or ether. And Hakim taught me that the stages of life were divided into 5 as well. And they were represented by 5 stages of the sun, starting with dawn and ending with dusk. So all of these 5s were all part of my Rayad Sekem Egyptian alchemy healing system, which was developed following my meetings with Hakim. So we're on our way down to Tel El Amarna on this 555 date without really realizing that we'd picked that date. And I'd also been working on a new attunement. Are you familiar with what an attunement is, or an initiation? Or perhaps some of the viewers might not be.
Some of the viewers might not, so perhaps you might want to give a little description.
Okay, so if anybody listening has studied Reiki, they will have received attunements or initiations, which really are just a little ceremony which helps to adjust your frequency to a new frequency, which is in keeping with the new deities and beings that you are going to be working with. So I like to describe it as it's as if you're suddenly wearing a purple hat, and all the deities out there know to look for a purple hat, so that when they see that you're wearing one, they think, great, this is somebody who's attuned to work with me. So that's how I describe it.
Perfect metaphor. It's perfect.
Well, it's, I mean, if you look at it from a frequency point of view, it is literally like taking a radio and tuning in the radio to work with a new radio station. So that's another way of looking at it. But yeah, the purple hat is nice. So I'd been working on some new attunements, which are usually sacred symbols drawn into one or more of the chakras. And normally it's 4 chakras. It's usually the throat, third eye, crown, and heart are the 4 that are attuned. But depending on the level of attunement, it can be different parts of the body as well, sometimes even the whole spine. And so I just developed a new attunement for my level 3, which is the early afternoon sun. And I wanted to tie it up with an animal. And I decided, because the system is described as wisdom, so it's like the scholar, in fact, so it's the first level of wisdom. So I thought the owl would be appropriate, but I didn't have any way of corroborating this idea. Day before, we're actually going to the pyramids in Giza, and I'm thinking about whether this owl was a good choice. And we see a jackal climbing up one of the pyramids, which I've never seen before or since. And I've been to Egypt quite a few times, so I thought that was really interesting corroboration. So that was part of it. And then the next day on the 555, when we were traveling down and we actually got to Tel El Amarna, we saw an owl fly over. How amazing is that?
That's amazing. So you had signs.
We had signs, yes. Yeah, definitely.
It's been so much fun talking with you, Joanna, today. Would you like to share your contact information with?
Sure, thank you. Well, my name's Joanna Bristow-Watkins, as Linda has kindly said. My company is called Harmony Healing, and being based in the UK, my website address is harmonyhealing.co.uk, and might ultimately become just harmonyhealing.uk because they're phasing out the co-UK. But through there, you can find me, you can email me through that, or you can use joe@harmonyhealing.co.uk to contact me directly.
And if people are interested in having the meditation that you're offering, would you like them to email you directly?
Well, they can, or they can just go onto the website. In the top right-hand corner is a subscribe to the mailing list. But if they do that and mention it, that they come through you, or I will contact them and say to let me know where they've heard about me. And if they mention you or the podcast, then I will send them a link to the meditation.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for your generous gift and for your presence here on Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our other episodes of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. That's it for today. We'll see you again next week. Bye for now.